This 4-year-old homeless girl is beaten after seeing a priest kissing a woman from his church. But a millionaire saw everything and did something that shocked everyone. Comment what you thought of this story, rating it from 0 to 10. I'd really love to know if you liked my story, and subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help. The clatter of a tin can rolling across the uneven cobblestones echoed through St. Sebastian's Church Square in Harmony Creek like a cry for help no one wanted to hear. Isabella Smith, barely 4 years old, felt her heart race when she saw the two adults abruptly break apart, their faces shifting from passion to fury in a blink. "You filthy brat!" Karen Miller shrieked, her tousled blonde hair almost as wild as her eyes, as she advanced towards the girl with clenched fists. "What did you see? Speak up!" Isabella recoiled, tripping over her own bare, dirty feet. Her torn clothes, once a pink dress in some distant memory, barely covered her skinny frame. She had learned during her months living on the streets of Harmony Creek that when adults screamed like that, pain always followed. "I didn't see anything, I didn't see anything," she stammered, her words tumbling out in a rush of fear. But it was a lie, and everyone there knew it. Father Michael O'Connell, 45, was still trying to straighten his cassock, which moments before had been clutched by Karen Miller's desperate hands. His dark eyes, which typically preached about love and forgiveness on Sunday mornings, now gleamed with a rage that made Isabella tremble. "Karen, calm down," the priest murmured, but his voice shook as much as the child's. "She's just a street kid. No one will believe her." Karen Miller, wife of Deacon Jeff Miller, a respected figure in the parish, couldn't stop shaking. At 38, she had sacrificed much to maintain the appearance of a perfect life, and now a dirty, abandoned child could destroy everything in minutes. "You don't understand," she whispered, grabbing the priest's arm tightly. "If she tells anyone, if my husband finds out, he'll kill me, Michael, literally." Isabella, who had developed an animalistic instinct for survival during her months on the streets, realized she was witnessing something she shouldn't. She tried to back away silently, but her bare feet stepped on another empty, and producing another clang that seemed to echo across the entire square. "She's going to tell," Karen exploded, losing all control. "Look at how she's looking at us." Across the square, near the bench where he usually waited for his daughter to finish her guitar lessons at the rectory, Benjamin "Ben" Carter watched the entire scene with growing indignation. At 52, the owner of a mid-sized construction materials company had seen a lot in life. But the sight of two adults threatening a defenseless child made something explode inside him. Ben was a man of average height, neatly combed, graying hair and calloused hands that spoke of someone who had built his business from the ground up. He had 3 defining characteristics: a brutal honesty that sometimes got him into trouble, a tendency to act on impulse when he witnessed injustice, and a fierce loyalty to those he considered under his protection. "Get out of here, you pest!" Karen shouted, pushing Isabella, who fell backward onto the cold pavement of the square. "And if I see you around here again, you'll regret it." That was the last straw. Ben crossed the square with long, determined strides, his expression hardening with every step. When he reached the small group, his voice cut through the air like a blade. "Take your hands off that child, now!" Karen and Father Michael turned, surprised, as if they had forgotten there was a world beyond their private drama. The priest was the first to recompose himself, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Mr. Carter, good to see you," Father Michael said, trying to sound casual as he helped Karen move away from Isabella. "We were just chatting with the little one about not disturbing church activities." "Chatting," Ben repeated, his voice laced with sarcasm. He knelt and extended his hand to Isabella, who was still on the ground. "She's crying, and you two were yelling. What kind of chat is that?" Isabella hesitated for a moment before accepting his offered hand. As Ben helped her up, He could feel her trembling and noticed the old bruises on her thin arms. Something broke inside him. "The girl has nowhere to stay," Karen said quickly, trying to control the situation. "I was just advising her about the dangers of sleeping around here." "Advising her with yells and shoves?" Ben questioned, not hiding the contempt in his voice. Just then, a 16-year-old girl appeared at the rectory door, looking confused at the scene in the square. Rebecca "Becca" Carter had messy brown hair, questioning eyes, and a perpetually defiant expression that had been giving her parents headaches for years. She was known at school for her explosive temper and tendency to get into trouble. But something in her father's protective stance and the fear in the little girl's eyes awakened an instinct she didn't even know she possessed. "Dad," she called, coming down the church steps, "what's going on here?" "Nothing that concerns you," Karen said coldly, pulling the priest's arm. "Michael, let's go. We have important things to discuss." But Ben didn't move, his eyes fixed on Isabella. The girl stared at him with a mix of hope and terror, as if she couldn't decide if he was another dangerous adult or a possible salvation. There was something in her gaze, a sharp intelligence that contrasted with her fragile appearance, that made Ben make a decision that would change his life forever. "What's your name?" he asked the child softly. "Isabella," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Isabella, do you have somewhere to sleep tonight?" The girl shook her head, and Ben felt his determination solidify like concrete. "Then you're coming home with me." Ben's declaration dropped like a bomb in the middle of the square. Karen Miller instantly paled, her eyes widening in absolute panic, while Father Michael stepped forward with hands outstretched in a desperate gesture. "Mr. Carter, please reconsider what you're saying," Father Michael whispered, looking nervously around to see if anyone else was listening. "The girl is complicated. She has serious issues. She's not appropriate for a family like yours." "What kind of issues?" Ben asked, his voice sharp as steel. Isabella shrank behind his legs, clutching the fabric of his pants like a lifeline. Karen exchanged a desperate look with the priest before responding, her voice trembling. She invents stories, horrible things that never happened, disturbed fantasies that can cause a lot of misunderstanding." Beggar, who had approached during the conversation, frowned. Something in the woman's desperate tone didn't sound like genuine concern, but pure terror of being exposed. "What kind of fantasies?" the teenager questioned, ignoring the warning look her father shot her. "Beggar, stay out of this," Ben murmured, but there was curiosity in his own voice. "She says she sees adults doing inappropriate things," Karen continued, forcing the words out. "She brazenly lies about situations that her childish mind completely distorts." Isabella looked up at Ben, and he could see a crystal-clear intelligence shining through her tears. It wasn't the look of a confused or fanciful child. It was the look of someone who had seen too much for her age, but who perfectly understood the reality around her. "Isabella," Ben said softly, squatting to her height, "do you want to come to my house?" The girl nodded vigorously, without a second's hesitation. Her immediate and desperate answer told Ben everything he needed to know about her current situation. "Dad!" Becca interjected, her voice filled with a determination that surprised everyone. "She's hungry. Look how thin she is." It was then that Ben truly observed Isabella's physical state. Beneath the dirt and superficial injuries, the child was visibly malnourished. Her arms were too thin, her cheeks hollow, and there was a fragility in her movements that spoke of weeks, perhaps months, of inadequate care. "You can't do this," Karen said, her voice rising an octave. "You can't just take a child off the street without documentation, without legal authorization. And you two can assault her in a public square," Becca retorted, surprising herself with her own courage. "At least my dad isn't hurting her." Father Michael grabbed Karen's arm when she took a threatening step toward the teenager. "Karen, control yourself. We're in public." "Let's go home," Ben decided, picking Isabella up. The girl was so light he felt a pang in his chest. "Beggar, grab your backpack. We'll talk about this at home." As they walked away, Ben could hear Karen urgently whispering with the priest, but he couldn't catch the words. What he did catch was the tone, absolute despair mixed with impotent rage. The drive to the Carter family home was silent. Isabella remained tense in Ben's arms, as if expecting him to change his mind at any moment and return her to the square. Beggar walked beside them, casting protective glances at the girl and thoughtful ones at her father. The Carter house was in a middle-class neighborhood of Harmony Creek, a two-story beige house with large windows and a small front yard. When they reached the door, Ben hesitated for the first time since making his decision. "Beggar," he said, lowering Isabella to the ground, but keeping a hand on her shoulder, "your mother is going to hit the roof when she sees this." "Leave it to me," Beggar replied, and there was a newfound confidence in her voice that Ben had never noticed before. "Mom has a soft spot when it comes to hurt children." Victoria Vicky Carter was in the kitchen preparing dinner when she heard the front door open. At 48, she was a meticulous and organized woman who planned every aspect of her life with military precision. Her brown hair was always pulled back in a neat bun, and she wore embroidered aprons she made herself in her free time. "You're home early today," she called from the kitchen. "Dinner's ready in 20 minutes. "Vicky," Ben called, his voice heavy with apprehension. "I need to talk to you." "Coming," she replied. But when she entered the living room and saw the small group standing near the door, her words died in her throat. Isabella was between Ben and Beggar, her dirty clothes starkly contrasting with the immaculate cleanliness of the house. Vicky blinked several times, as if she thought she was seeing a mirage. "Ben," she said slowly, "who is this child?" "Mom, she needs our help," Beggar said quickly, before her father could answer. "She was being mistreated in the church square." "Mistreated how?" Vicky asked, her maternal instinct immediately activated despite the confusion. "By adults who should have protected her," Ben replied. "Vicky, she has nowhere to sleep. She has no one." Vicky looked at Isabella, who stared back with huge, frightened eyes. The child was clearly malnourished and hurt, and there was something in her posture, the way she hunched, how she kept her arms close to her body, that spoke of constant fear. "My God," Vicky whispered, kneeling slowly before Isabella. "What's your name, dear?" "Isabella," the girl murmured, her voice barely audible. "Isabella," Vicky repeated softly. "What a beautiful name. Are you hungry?" The simple question broke something inside Isabella. Her eyes filled with tears, and she nodded desperately, as if admitting her hunger was confessing a terrible flaw. "Ben," Vicky said, rising with a determined expression, "while I give her a bath and find some clothes, you're going to tell me exactly what happened in the square." As Vicky took Isabella to the bathroom, Ben told Beggar all the details of what he had witnessed. The teenager listened in silence, but her expression grew darker and darker. "Dad," she said when he finished, "Father Michael always gave me the creeps. There's something off about the way he looks at the women in the congregation." "Beggar, we shouldn't make accusations without proof," Ben warned, though he himself had noticed some questionable behavior from the priest. "And the woman, Karen? Do I know her?" "She's married to Deacon Jeff Miller. You must have seen her at Mass. That big grumpy man who always stands with his arms crossed during sermons." "That's the one." Beggar grimaced. "If I were married to him, I'd probably look for comfort elsewhere too." "Beggar, what? I'm just saying the man looks like a grumpy bear, and if he's violent like Karen said." Just then they heard footsteps coming down the stairs. Vicky appeared, holding Isabella's hand, who was unrecognizable, Clean and wearing one of Becker's old nightgowns, the girl revealed clear blonde hair and piercing blue eyes. But what attracted the most attention was her expression, alert and intelligent, as if mentally cataloguing every detail of the house. "My God," Ben murmured, "she's beautiful." "And very thin," Vicky added, her voice filled with maternal concern. "When was the last time you ate something substantial, dear?" Isabella thought for a moment, as if performing complex calculations. "Yesterday morning a man gave me half a sandwich near the bus terminal." "Half a sandwich?" Beggar repeated, horrified. "Is that all you've eaten in 2 days?" The girl nodded naturally, as if it were perfectly normal, and Vicky felt something break inside her. "Well," she said, forcing a smile, "we're going to fix that right now. How about a plate of rice and beans?" Isabella's eyes lit up, as if Vicky had offered the greatest treasure in the world. During dinner, as Isabella devoured her food with a desperate hunger that broke everyone's heart at the table, she began to speak, and it was then that the Carter family discovered they had brought home much more than a needy child. Father Michael told Miss Karen that they were going to run away together to a city far from here, Isabella said casually between bites, as if commenting on the weather. Vicky nearly choked on her water. "What?" she cried, and said her husband would be very angry if he found out, and the priest said not to worry because no one would discover. Ben and Vicky exchanged astounded glances. The girl was repeating the conversation she had heard with impressive accuracy, as if she had a mental recording of every word. "Isabella," Vicky said carefully, "can you remember everything people say?" "Yes," the girl replied as if it were obvious. "My head keeps everything. That's why adults get mad at me. They say things they don't want me to remember." Just then, the house phone rang, cutting the tense silence that followed Isabella's revelation. Ben answered it, and his expression gradually grew darker as he listened to the voice on the other end of the line. "Who was it?" Vicky asked when he hung up. "Father Michael," Ben replied, his voice filled with apprehension. "He's coming here in an hour. Said we need to talk about Isabella's situation urgently." The atmosphere in the Carter home became tense after the phone call. Vicky immediately took Isabella to the guest room, claiming the girl needed to rest, but everyone knew she was trying to protect her from the conversation to come. Beggar adamantly refused to go to her room, crossing her arms in a defiant stance her parents knew. "Well, Beggar, this isn't for you to get involved in," Ben said, but his voice lacked its usual firmness. "Dad, I was there when everything happened. I saw how they treated Isabella. I won't let you hand her back to those monsters." Vicky came down the stairs with a worried expression. She fell asleep almost instantly. She must have been exhausted for days. She paused, looking at her husband. "Ben, are you sure we did the right thing?" "Absolutely," he replied without hesitation. "But I'm worried about what the priest wants, the way he called. There was something threatening in his voice." Exactly an hour later, the doorbell rang. Through the living room window, they could see not only Father Michael, but also Karen Miller standing nervously behind him. The woman looked like she had been crying, her red, swollen eyes contrasting with her pale skin. Ben opened the door cautiously. "Father Michael, Karen." "Mr. Carter," the priest said, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "May we come in? We have urgent matters to discuss regarding the child." Vicky gestured for them to sit in the living room, but remained standing, her arms crossed in a defensive posture. Beggar positioned herself strategically near the stairs, as if she were a sentinel protecting the upper floor. "Where is Isabella?" Karen asked immediately, her eyes scanning the room nervously. "Resting," Vicky replied coldly. "Why?" Father Michael cleared his throat. Mr. Carter, we understand your good intentions, but you don't comprehend the gravity of the situation. Isabella is not an ordinary child. We've heard that before, Becca said, ignoring her mother's warning glance. You said she invents stories. She doesn't invent them, Karen quickly corrected, realizing her previous mistake. She distorts reality. She takes fragments of conversations and constructs fantastic narratives that can ruin innocent people's reputations. What kind of narratives? Vicky asked, her voice dangerously calm. Father Michael and Karen exchanged quick glances before the priest responded. She has a fixation on adult relationships. She imagines inappropriate situations between people who barely know each other. Like you and Karen? Becca asked directly. The silence that followed was deafening. Karen paled even further, if that were possible, while the priest clenched and unclenched his fists nervously. Exactly, Father Michael said finally. She saw Karen and me discussing parish matters and turned it into something sordid. Discussing? Ben repeated. Because what I saw looked much more intimate than a discussion. Mr. Carter, Karen said, her voice trembling, Father Michael was consoling me. My husband, he has anger issues. Sometimes I need spiritual guidance on how to deal with difficult situations at home. And that spiritual guidance involves passionate embraces, Becca questioned, making Vicky turn to her daughter in surprise. Becca, you didn't say you saw that, Vicky murmured. I didn't, the teenager admitted, but I saw how they reacted when they got close to Isabella. Innocent people don't act with such desperation. Just then, light footsteps echoed down the stairs. Isabella appeared at the top, wearing Becca's borrowed pajamas and holding a teddy bear Vicky had found in the closet. I heard voices, she said in her small voice. I thought it was a nightmare, but it was real. Karen abruptly stood up when she saw the girl. Isabella, dear, you need to come with us. We have a much better place for you to stay. I don't want to go, Isabella replied, coming down a few steps but maintaining a safe distance. I like it here. Miss Victoria gave me food and a warm bath. But you can't. Stay with strangers, the priest insisted. It's not safe. You're strangers too, Isabella retorted with a crystal-clear logic that left the adults speechless. And you hurt me. No one hurt you, Karen said, her voice growing sharper. You're confusing things again. It was then that Isabella did something that completely changed the course of the conversation. She lifted the sleeve of her pajamas, showing a purple mark on her arm. This is when you pushed me in the square. And this, she said, showing a scratch on her knee, is when I fell on the ground. Vicky immediately went up the stairs and examined the marks. They were recent, exactly as Isabella had described. She hurt herself, Karen said desperately. Street children do that to get sympathy. A 4-year-old child intentionally hurts herself? Vicky questioned, her voice filled with incredulity and growing anger. You don't understand, the priest said, abruptly standing up. Isabella has a history of behavioral issues. She escaped from the city shelter 3 times last month. What shelter? Ben asked, an unpleasant suspicion beginning to form in his mind. The St. Francis Children's Home, run by Senator Maxwell Max Thorne, Father Michael responded. A dedicated man who has tried to help Isabella, but she refuses to accept help. Isabella, who had been quiet, suddenly began to tremble violently. I don't want to go back to Uncle Maxwell. Please, don't take me there. The absolute terror in the child's voice made all the adults stop. Vicky went up more steps and held Isabella close, feeling the small body shake. Why don't you want to go back, dear? Vicky asked softly. Uncle Maxwell gets angry when the children make noise. He hurts us to teach us to be quiet. She's lying, Karen said quickly. Maxwell Thorne is a respected man in the community. He dedicates his life to caring for abandoned children. Then why would she run away 3 times? Becca questioned. Because she's a troubled child, Karen exploded, losing her composure. She doesn't accept authority. She doesn't follow rules. Karen, the priest warned, noticing how her outburst was affecting the Carter family. Just then, Isabella spoke again, her voice clear despite her fear. Uncle Maxwell told Father Michael that if he didn't bring me back, he'd tell everyone about what the priest did with Ms. Karen at the church. The silence that followed was absolute. Karen went, white as a sheet, while Father Michael seemed to have stopped breathing. "What did you say?" Ben whispered. "I heard them talking last night," Isabella continued, her photographic memory kicking in. "Uncle Maxwell was very angry. Said that if the priest didn't stop messing around and brought me back, he'd show the pictures to Miss Karen's husband." "What pictures?" Vicky asked, though part of her already knew she didn't want to hear the answer. "Of the times the priest and Miss Karen kissed in the church. Uncle Maxwell has a camera." The bomb had exploded. Karen began to cry uncontrollably, while Father Michael ran his hands over his face in absolute despair. "That's it," Ben said, standing up with determination. "You two are leaving my house right now." "Mr. Carter, please," the priest pleaded. "You don't understand the complexity of the situation." "I understand perfectly," Ben retorted. "You're being blackmailed by this Maxwell, and you want to use an innocent child as a bargaining chip." "If Maxwell shows those pictures to Deacon Jeff, he'll kill me," Karen cried. "He'll literally kill me." "Then maybe you should have thought of that before," Becca said coldly, surprising everyone with her harshness. "Becca," Vicky warned, but there was admiration in her voice for her daughter's courage. "What, Mom? They want to sacrifice a 4-year-old child to save their own skin. That's disgusting." Father Michael made one last desperate attempt. "If you don't hand over Isabella, Maxwell won't just expose our mistake. He'll make you look like criminals for kidnapping a minor." "Let him try," Ben said, walking to the door and opening it. "Get out, now." As Karen and Father Michael reluctantly headed for the door, the woman turned one last time. "You don't know who you're messing with. Maxwell Thorne has connections. He can make your lives a living hell." "More of a hell than a 4-year-old child living on the streets?" Vicky retorted. "I doubt it." After the door closed, the Carter family remained silent for a few moments. Isabella had stopped trembling, but still clung to Vicky as if her life depended on it. "Dad," Becca said finally, "what are we going to do? If this Maxwell is really dangerous—" "We're going to protect Isabella," Ben replied without hesitation. "And we're going to find out exactly what's happening at that shelter." "How?" Vicky asked. "I have some contacts at City Hall," Ben said. "I'll make some discreet calls tomorrow." Just then the phone rang again. Ben answered it, and his expression gradually grew darker. "Who was it?" Vicky asked when he hung up. "Maxwell Thorne," Ben replied, his voice filled with apprehension. "He's coming here personally to get Isabella. He'll be here in 2 hours." The news that Maxwell Thorne was coming personally to get Isabella transformed the Carter family home into a silent battlefield. Vicky immediately went upstairs with the girl to the guest room and began locking the windows, as if that could prevent what was to come. Ben paced nervously around the living room, making urgent calls to his contacts, while Becca positioned herself as a sentinel at the front window. "Dad," Becca said, her voice tense, "do you know this man?" "Only by name," Ben replied, hanging up another frustrated call. "Maxwell Thorne has a complicated reputation in town. Rich, influential, but there are rumors." "What kind of rumors?" "Nothing proven. Suspicions about irregularities in the shelter's funding, political favoritism. The kind of thing everyone whispers about, but no one dares to investigate." Vicky came down the stairs with a determined expression. "Isabella is hidden in the closet in the room. She said she always hides when adults fight because of her. She shouldn't have to hide, Beggar said, her hands clenched into fists. A 4-year-old shouldn't know that kind of fear. Becker's right, Vicky said, sitting heavily on the sofa. Ben, what did you find out from your calls? Little, he admitted. Dr. Daniel Green from Social Services said the St. Francis Children's Home had its documentation in order, but he seemed nervous talking about it, as if there were things he couldn't say. And legally, do we have any right to keep Isabella here? Technically, no. Maxwell has temporary legal custody of all children at the shelter. If he wants to take her, we can't stop him. Unless we prove she's being mistreated, Beggar said. How? Based on the testimony of a 4-year-old child against an influential man? Who will believe it? Just then, they heard the sound of a car stopping in front of the house. It was a black Mercedes with tinted windows, exactly the kind of vehicle that would intimidate anyone. Becca moved away from the window. "He's here," she whispered. The doorbell rang once, a short, authoritative sound. Ben took a deep breath and went to answer it, followed by Vicky and Becca. The man at the door was the exact opposite of what anyone would expect from someone caring for vulnerable children. Maxwell Thorne, at 55, was tall and corpulent, with greying hair combed back and small, calculating eyes. He wore an expensive suit and carried a leather briefcase that seemed to contain important documents. There were 2 men behind him, clearly private security. "Mr. Benjamin Carter," Maxwell said, his voice deep and controlled. "I am Maxwell Thorne, director of the St. Francis Children's Home. I believe you have something that belongs to me." "If you're referring to Isabella, she's no one's property," Ben replied, keeping his voice firm despite the obvious intimidation. Maxwell smiled, but it wasn't a warm smile. "Mr. Carter, I admire your compassion, but there are legal matters involved here. Isabella has been under my legal custody since she was found abandoned 6 months ago." "Abandoned how?" Vicky asked, appearing beside her husband. "Found wandering alone on the streets, without documents, without known family. The St. Francis Children's Home offers specialized care for cases like hers." "What kind of specialized care?" Becca questioned, ignoring her parents' warning glances. Maxwell observed the teenager with cold interest. "Care for children with severe behavioral disorders. Isabella has a tendency to confabulate, episodes of aggression, difficulty adapting socially." "That's not true," Becca said firmly. "She spent the whole afternoon here and showed no aggressive behavior." "Of course not," Maxwell replied with forced patience. "Children like Isabella can be extremely manipulative. They know exactly how to behave to win the sympathy of well-meaning adults." "Where is she?" one of Maxwell's men asked, his voice rough and threatening. "That's none of your business," Ben retorted, feeling his anger rise. Maxwell made a subtle gesture, and the man backed down. "Mr. Carter, I understand your reluctance to hand over the child, but you must understand that you are interfering in an official legal process." He opened his briefcase and pulled out several documents. "Here is the temporary custody order, signed by Judge Robert Anderson. Here is Isabella's psychological report, confirming her behavioral disorders. And here," he said, producing another paper, "is the authorization for search and seizure, should it be necessary." Vicky examined the documents with growing horror. Everything seemed official, stamped and signed by the competent authorities. "You can't just barge into our house," she said. "I can, if necessary, to protect a minor at risk," Maxwell replied calmly. "But I prefer to resolve this amicably." It was then that a small voice echoed from the top of the stairs. "I don't want to go with Uncle Maxwell." Everyone turned to see Isabella slowly descending the steps, her teddy bear clutched against her chest. Despite the obvious fear in her eyes, there was determination in her posture. "Isabella!" Maxwell exclaimed, his voice completely changing to a sugary, fake tone. "My dear girl, you worried us so much when you ran. Away again." "I didn't run away," Isabella said, stopping halfway down the stairs. "I ran because you hurt the children when you get angry." Maxwell's smile wavered for a fraction of a second before returning. "Dear, you know sometimes discipline is needed to help you grow up right, and look what stories you're inventing for these good people." "They're not stories. I remember everything." Isabella turned to the adults in the room, who were listening to every word. "The bald man who works for him told my mother that if she didn't sign the papers, bad things would happen. She cried a lot and gave me a kiss before they took me." Michelle began to cry. "It's true. They threatened me. They said if I didn't sign the voluntary custody transfer, they'd make up that I was a drug addict and I'd lose Isabella anyway, but then I'd never see her again." "Ma'am, you are clearly distraught," Maxwell said, but his voice no longer sounded so controlled. "Isabella has serious psychological problems. She implants false memories into the minds of vulnerable adults." "A 4-year-old does that?" the coffee shop owner asked, unable to remain silent any longer. "She seems like a normal girl to me." "Sir, that's not your concern," one of Maxwell's henchmen said, advancing toward the counter. "Actually, it is," a new voice said from the door. Everyone turned to see Mark Davis entering the cafe, accompanied by a photographer. "I'm a journalist from the Daily Sentinel, and I'm investigating irregularities at the St. Francis Children's Home." Maxwell's face went pale. "You have no authority to interfere with an official operation." "I have the authority to document a possible injustice," Mark replied calmly, while his photographer discreetly began snapping photos. "Mr. Thorne, is it true that the shelter received over $500,000 in federal funds last year?" "That's confidential," Maxwell snapped. "And is it true that only 8 children are registered as permanent residents of the shelter?" "The numbers are complex. $62,000 per child per year. Seems like a lot for basic care, don't you think?" Maxwell realized he was being cornered. "This conversation is over. Come, Isabella." "No," Isabella said firmly, surprising everyone with her courage. "I'm not going with you. I want to stay with my mother." "You're coming with me whether you want to or not," Maxwell said, finally losing his composure and taking a threatening step toward the girl. It was then that Beggar did something that changed everything. The teenager placed herself between Maxwell and Isabella, pulling her cell phone from her pocket. "I just recorded all of this," she said, showing the phone. "Your threats, your lies, everything, and I've already sent it to 3 different people." "Stupid girl," Maxwell growled, gesturing to his henchman. "I wouldn't do that," Mark Davis said, raising his own recording. "Everything is being documented. Any violence here will become national headlines tomorrow." Just then, sirens began to blare outside. Through the window, they could see 2 police cruisers arriving at the cafe. "Who called the police?" Maxwell asked, clearly nervous. "I did," the cafe owner said, holding an old-fashioned phone. "When I saw adult men intimidating a child, I thought it best to call for help." 3 police officers entered the establishment, led by a middle-aged sergeant with a thick mustache. "What's going on here?" the sergeant asked. "Sergeant Rodriguez," Maxwell said, quickly regaining his composure. "I'm Maxwell Thorne, director of the St. Francis Children's Home. I'm here to retrieve a minor who has escaped legal care." "That's a lie," Michelle exclaimed. "This is my daughter. They kidnapped her from me 8 months ago." The sergeant looked confused between the adults, then at Isabella, who clung to her mother's leg. "There are a lot of people talking at once here," he said. "Let's calm down. Mr. Thorne, can you show me the documentation?" Maxwell handed over his papers with renewed confidence. The sergeant examined them carefully. "It all seems to be in order," he said. "Ma'am, do you have any documents proving you're the child's mother?" Michelle desperately opened her purse, pulling out a folder with documents. I have her original birth certificate, vaccination card, baby photos. The sergeant examined Michelle's documents with equal attention. His expression became confused. "Strange," he murmured. "Both sets of documents seem legitimate." "Sergeant," Mark Davis said, approaching, "may I suggest you do a DNA test? That would be the only way to determine the truth with certainty." "That would take days," Maxwell said quickly. "The child needs to return to the shelter today. There are safety issues involved." "What kind of safety issues?" the sergeant asked. "The child has severe behavioral problems. She constantly runs away, puts herself in risky situations." "I don't run away," Isabella protested. "I run because Uncle Maxwell hurts the children." "See?" Maxwell said, as if that proved his point. "Constant delusions." "Sergeant," Ben said, approaching, "may I suggest a temporary solution? How about Isabella staying in police custody until the DNA test is done? That way she'd be safe, and the truth would be discovered." "Impossible," Maxwell said immediately. "The child has special needs that only the shelter can meet." "What special needs?" Mark Davis questioned, his pen ready to write. Maxwell hesitated. She needs controlled medication for her behavioral disorders." "What medication?" Michelle asked, alarmed. "Isabella has never needed any medication." "See?" Maxwell said. "You don't even know the child's medical needs." It was then that Isabella spoke again, her clear voice cutting through the adults' arguments. "Sergeant, Uncle Maxwell gives bad medicine to the children, medicine that makes us very sleepy and forget things." "What kind of medicine?" the sergeant asked, his attention fully focused on the girl now. "Small, white pills, and sometimes shots that make us sleep for a long time." "She's hallucinating again," Maxwell said, but there was sweat on his forehead. "Sergeant," Becca said, "if she's making all this up, why is he so nervous?" The officer observed Maxwell carefully. 20 years on the force, he had developed an instinct for detecting lies, and something in the shelter director's behavior was setting off all his alarms. "Mr. Thorne," he said slowly, "I think it's best we handle this officially. I'm taking all of you to the police station, and we'll sort this out properly." "This is unnecessary," Maxwell protested. "I have legal documentation." "And you do too, ma'am," the sergeant said, looking at Michelle. "Let the chief decide." "Sergeant," Mark Davis said, "as a journalist, may I accompany you? This could be an important story of public interest." "You may." As everyone headed for the cruisers, Maxwell whispered something to one of his henchmen, who discreetly moved away from the group and exited through the cafe's back door. Isabella, walking between Michelle and Vicky, looked back and saw the man leaving. She tugged on Becca's sleeve. "The bald man left," she whispered. "What bald man?" Becca asked. "The one who took me from home the day they picked me up." "He went another way." Becca felt a shiver of apprehension. Whatever Maxwell was planning, he had just set it in motion. "Dad," she whispered urgently to Ben, "I think we're in more trouble than we thought." The Harmony Creek police station was bustling when everyone arrived. Chief Thomas Williams, a 50-year-old man with white hair and thick-rimmed glasses, watched the situation with growing perplexity. It wasn't common to have so many people involved in a child custody dispute, especially with a journalist documenting everything. "Mr. Thorne," the chief said, organizing the documents on his desk, "explain to me again why a simple custody transfer has become a media circus." Maxwell, who had regained his composure during the ride to the station, replied calmly, "Chief Williams, this is about a child with severe psychological disorders who is being manipulated by well-meaning but misinformed adults." "And you, Michelle Smith," the chief continued, turning to Isabella's mother, "are you alleging that this child was illegally removed from your custody?" "Yes, Chief," Michelle responded, holding Isabella on her lap. My daughter was taken from me based on forged documents. I never signed any voluntary custody transfer. But we have your signature here, Maxwell said, producing a document from his briefcase. Notarized. Michelle examined the paper and turned pale. This isn't my signature. I never signed this. Chief, Mark Davis interjected, may I suggest a forensic handwriting analysis of the signature? If it's forged, that's a federal crime. The chief sighed. Mr. Davis, I understand you're doing your job, but I need to deal with the immediate facts first. He turned to Isabella, who was quiet on her mother's lap. Hi, little one. What's your name? Isabella Smith, she replied in her clear voice. And who are these people? The chief asked, pointing to Michelle and then to Maxwell. This is my mommy Michelle, Isabella said without hesitation. And this is Uncle Maxwell, who is mean to me. Mean how? The chief asked, noticing Maxwell tense up. He gives bad medicine to the children and hurts us when we cry. Chief, Maxwell interrupted quickly, as I explained, the child suffers from disorders that make her invent elaborate stories. It's a common defense mechanism in cases of trauma. What kind of trauma? The chief questioned. Family abandonment, neglect. Unfortunately, when we found Isabella, she was in deplorable condition. That's not true, Michelle exclaimed. Isabella was never neglected. She was well cared for when she was taken from me. Just then, the police station door opened and a man entered, who made everyone turn. He was a man of about 40, bald as Isabella had described, wearing expensive clothes but with a nervous expression. Ah, Marcus, Maxwell said with obvious relief. Good you arrived. Who is this gentleman? The chief asked. Marcus Jones, social worker responsible for Isabella's case, Maxwell replied. He can clarify all the details about how the child came to our shelter. When Isabella saw Marcus, she immediately shrank against Michelle, visibly starting to tremble. It's him, she whispered, her voice full of terror. He's the bald man who took me from my mommy. Marcus forced a smile. Hello, Isabella. See how scared she is? It's because she knows she needs to go back for treatment. It's not fear of treatment, Beggar said, observing the girl's reaction. It's terror of you specifically. Young lady, that's none of your business, Marcus said coldly. Marcus, the chief said, can you show us your report on how Isabella arrived at the shelter? Of course, Marcus replied, opening his briefcase. The child was found wandering alone on the streets of Willow Creek. She was malnourished, with signs of severe neglect. The biological mother was not located after extensive searches. Lie! Michelle cried. I was working. You knew exactly where to find me. Ma'am, Marcus said condescendingly, the alleged biological mother appeared at our offices several times, but in a clear state of intoxication, making wild accusations. I've never had a drink in my life, Michelle protested. We have medical reports proving otherwise, Marcus retorted, producing more papers. Mark Davis stepped closer. May I see those medical reports? Marcus hesitated. They're confidential. In a custody case, transparency is essential, the chief said. Show the reports. Reluctantly, Marcus handed over the documents. Mark examined them carefully, his expression growing increasingly skeptical. These exams were done at St. Lucy's Hospital, correct? The journalist asked. Yes, Marcus confirmed. Funny. I called the hospital yesterday investigating another story. Dr. Arthur Kennedy, who supposedly signed these reports, has been on medical leave for a year due to heart problems. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus was visibly sweating, while Maxwell began to fidget nervously in his chair. There must have been an administrative error, Maxwell said quickly. Or forged documents, Mark Davis said. Chief, this is evidence of a federal crime. Just then, Isabella did something that surprised everyone. She slipped from Michelle's lap and walked directly to the chief. "Chief," she said in her childish but determined voice, "can I tell you something important?" "You can, dear." "Uncle Marcus and Uncle Maxwell talk about selling children to rich people who can't have kids." The accusation dropped like a bomb in the middle of the police station. Maxwell abruptly stood up. "This is absurd, a fantasy of a troubled child." "It's not a fantasy," Isabella said calmly. "They sold Maria Clara to a couple from Los Angeles for a lot of money, and Anna Sophia to some Japanese people who live in Washington, D.C. Where did you hear these things?" the chief asked, completely focused on the girl now. "I hide behind Uncle Maxwell's office door when they think I'm sleeping. My head remembers everything they say." "Chief," Marcus said desperately, "the child has auditory hallucinations. It's documented in her medical file." "What medical file?" Mark Davis questioned. "Signed by the same doctor who's been on leave for a year." Vicky, who had remained quiet until then, stood up. "Chief, there's something everyone needs to know. Isabella has a photographic memory. She can repeat entire conversations word for word with absolute precision." "Is that true?" "The Guy?" Chief asked the girl. "It is? Do you want me to repeat what Uncle Maxwell told Father Michael last night?" Before anyone could answer, Isabella began to recite. Uncle Maxwell said, "Father, you're going to stop this nonsense about Karen right now, or I'll release the photos to her husband. And if you don't bring Isabella back to me by tomorrow, everyone will know what kind of priest you are." The chief looked astonished at the precision and detail of the imitation. Isabella had perfectly reproduced not only the words, but the vocal inflections and the threatening tone. "How could she invent something so specific?" he murmured. "Chief," Maxwell said, his voice now filled with poorly disguised desperation, "you can't base an investigation on the fanciful testimony of a 4-year-old child." "There's more," Isabella continued relentlessly. "Uncle Marcus said, 'Maxwell, we need to be more careful. The city audit is coming, and if they find out we only have 5 real children at the shelter but received funding for 20, we're going to have problems.'" Marcus was now visibly sweating. She's mixing different conversations, creating a false narrative." And Uncle Maxwell replied, Isabella continued relentlessly, "Don't worry. The children we sell have new documentation. Officially, they never existed. And if anyone asks questions, we have friends in the judicial system who will fix it." Chief Thomas Williams had worked 25 years in law enforcement and knew how to recognize the truth when he heard it. The precision of the details, the consistency of the narrative, and most importantly, the natural way the child reported complex information that she couldn't possibly invent, all pointed to a single, terrible conclusion. "Mr. Thorne," he said slowly, "I think it's best you remain in custody until we clarify this situation." "Chief, this is absurd," Maxwell protested. "You can't arrest a respectable citizen based on solid evidence," the chief interrupted. "Officers, handcuff both of them." As Maxwell and Marcus were handcuffed, Isabella approached Deacon Jeff. "Mr. Miller, will Ms. Karen be okay?" The simple, innocent question made the big man kneel in front of the girl. "She will, little one, and so will you. No one will ever hurt you again." "Chief," Michelle said, still hugging Isabella, "can my daughter come home with me now?" "Technically, yes," he replied, "but I recommend you stay in town for a few days until all legal procedures are finalized." "They can stay at our house," Vicky offered immediately. "We have plenty of room." "Thank you," Michelle said, tears of relief streaming down her face. "I don't know how to thank you for everything you've done for Isabella." "No need to thank us," Ben said. "We did what any decent person would do." Mark Davis approached the group. "Carter family, may I ask some questions for my report? This story needs to be told. Other children may be in similar situations elsewhere." "Of course," Ben agreed. "But first, let's go home. Isabella needs to rest." As They left the police station. Becca walked beside Isabella. How do you feel knowing those bad men can't hurt you anymore? Isabella thought for a moment. I feel light, like the birds I see flying. And are you sure you want to go live with your mother again? Yes, I do, but I'll miss you all. We're not going anywhere, Becca said, holding Isabella's small hand. We'll always be your friends. That night, at the Carter family home, two families, one biological and one chosen, gathered around the dinner table. Michelle told her complete story, how she was a nurse in Willow Creek, how she raised Isabella alone after the child's father left, how her life crumbled when her daughter disappeared. I never stopped looking, she said, her voice choked. I spent all my savings hiring private detectives, traveling to other cities, printing flyers. And Isabella's father? Vicky asked delicately. He was a resident doctor at the hospital where I worked, Michelle replied. When he found out about the pregnancy, he simply vanished. I never heard from him again. He doesn't know he has a daughter, Becca asked. He knows, but he chose to ignore that reality. Isabella, who had been quietly listening to the adults, suddenly spoke. Mommy, do you remember the song you used to sing to me before bed? Of course I do, Michelle said, smiling through her tears. Do you want me to sing it? Yes. Michelle began to hum a sweet, simple melody about a flower that grew even in difficult soil. Isabella closed her eyes and smiled, clearly recognizing every note. Now I remember everything, she said when the song ended. How you smelled like herbal soap, how you made me pancakes on Sundays, how you read stories making funny voices. And I remember how you always asked why about everything, Michelle said, kissing her daughter's forehead, and how you drew butterflies on every piece of paper you found. I still like to draw, Isabella said. Becca gave me colored pencils. You can draw whenever you want, Michelle promised. Mark Davis, who had been invited to dinner, made some discreet notes. Michelle, may I ask how you plan to rebuild your life after all this? First, I'm going to make sure Isabella gets all the psychological support she needs, she replied. Then I'll look for work here in Harmony Creek. I want to stay close to the people who saved my daughter. You don't need to stay for our sake, Ben said. It's not just for you all, Michelle said. It's because I want Isabella to grow up knowing good people like you, and because I myself need to learn to trust the world again. Later, when Isabella was already asleep in the guest room between her mother and Vicky, she had asked to sleep between the two of them. The adults gathered in the living room for a more serious conversation. Mark, Ben said, how many other children do you think were affected by this scheme? Based on the documents Deacon Jeff brought, at least 12 children were illegally adopted in the last 2 years, the journalist replied. I'm going to investigate every case. And the families who bought these children? Vicky asked. Many may not know they participated in something illegal. They probably thought they were making legitimate adoptions through an agency. That's so sad, Becca said. Imagine the pain of those families when they discover the truth. And the pain of the families who lost their children, Michelle added, like I lost Isabella. Just then they heard light footsteps on the stairs. Isabella appeared, rubbing her eyes. I can't sleep, she said. I keep thinking about the other children who are still lost. Michelle stood up and picked her daughter up. Honey, you don't need to worry about that now. But I do, Isabella said with surprising determination for a 4-year-old. I remember their names, and I remember where they went. Maybe I can help them go home too. The silence that followed was heavy with emotion. Here was a child who had suffered unimaginable traumas, but who still wanted to help other children in the same situation. Do you want to help find the other children? Mark Davis asked softly. Yes, I do. Maria Clara cried every night because she missed her older sister. And John Peter always spoke of his grandma who took care of him. They deserved to go home. It was then that everyone realized Isabella's story was just the beginning. Her extraordinary memory and courage could be the key to reuniting many other families separated by Maxwell Thorne's greed and cruelty. "Then we'll help them all," Ben said with determination, "no matter how long it takes." "Altogether," Michelle agreed, hugging her daughter tighter. And for the first time in 8 long months, Isabella Smith felt truly safe and loved, knowing that she now had not only her mother back, but an entire family willing to fight for her and for other children who still needed to be saved. The next morning, the Carter family home woke up with a different energy. For the first time in months, Isabella had slept through the night without nightmares, nestled between her mother and Vicky. The aroma of fresh coffee and sweet rolls that Michelle had insisted on preparing as a form of gratitude filled the entire house. Mark Davis arrived early, carrying a stack of newspapers and his laptop. The story of the St. Francis Children's Home investigation had made headlines in 3 regional newspapers, and his phone wouldn't stop ringing with calls from other media outlets interested in the story. "The repercussion is national," he announced, spreading the newspapers over the kitchen table. "I've already received calls from CNN, Fox News, even a New York talk show that wants to do an interview." "Isabella is not doing any interviews," Michelle said firmly, hugging her daughter protectively. "She's suffered enough." "I completely agree," Ben said, "but maybe Mark can use the media attention to find the other children." Isabella, who was sitting on her mother's lap, eating a slice of bread with jam, looked up. "Can I tell Mark about the other children? Just their names and where they went?" "Are you sure, dear?" Michelle asked. "You don't have to force yourself." "I want to help," Isabella said with determination. "Maria Clara is only 3. She must be very scared." Mark Davis carefully opened his laptop. "Isabella, can you tell me everything you remember? Take your time." The girl closed her eyes for a moment, as if accessing a mental file. When she began to speak, her precision was impressive. "Maria Clara Anderson was taken to a family in Los Angeles, in a neighborhood Uncle Marcus called Beverly Hills. The couple's names are Robert and Patricia Anderson. They paid $60,000. Mark typed quickly, capturing every detail. "John Peter Tanaka went to Washington, D.C. to a Japanese couple. The man's name is Kenji and the woman's is Yuki. They own an electronics store. They paid $70,000 because John Peter is very fair-skinned and has light eyes." "My God," Vicky murmured. "She really remembers everything." "Anna Sophia Miller went to a rich family in Denver. The woman couldn't have children and cried a lot when she came to pick up Anna. Her name is Sarah, something with an M." "Sarah with an M," Mark repeated. "Yes, but I don't remember the rest. The man just called her Sarah." Isabella continued to relay information about 8 different children, each account filled with specific details that it would be impossible for a 4-year-old to invent. "Charlie Davis was the saddest for me," she said, her voice growing small. "He had Down syndrome and was very affectionate. He went to a family in Dallas who specifically wanted a special needs child to do good." Michelle held her daughter tighter, feeling the pain in every word. "Uncle Maxwell was happier with Charles's sale because he said defective children are more work and cost more to maintain." The silence that followed was heavy. Mark Davis stopped typing, clearly moved by the cruelty revealed in Isabella's words. "How long have these sales been going on?" Beggar asked. "Since before I came to the shelter," Isabella replied. "Uncle Maxwell said he had already sold over 20 children in the last 3 years. 20 children, Ben repeated, horrified. 20 destroyed families." Just then the house phone rang. Ben answered it, and his expression grew gradually more serious. "It was Chief Thomas Williams," he said after hanging up. "Maxwell Thorne hired a famous lawyer from Chicago and is trying to reverse the preventive arrest." "Can he succeed?" Michelle asked, alarmed. "The chief said the evidence is solid, but Maxwell has political connections. It could be a long process." "And if he manages to get out of jail?" Vicky questioned. "He'll try to silence Isabella," Mark Davis said gravely. "A witness with a memory like hers is too dangerous for him." It was then that Beggar asked a question that changed the course of everything. "Mark, do you know anyone at the FBI? This is no longer a local case." "Yes, I do. FBI agent Marco Antonio Turner works on child trafficking cases. He'd be very interested in this story." "Then call him," Ben said. "The more official protection Isabella has, the better." 2 hours later, FBI agent Marco Antonio Turner was sitting in the Carter living room, a small team of investigators beside him. He was a serious man, 40 years old, with a presence that inspired confidence. "Carter family," he said, "what you've uncovered is the tip of a much larger iceberg. We've been investigating a national child trafficking network for 2 years." "Is Maxwell part of this network?" Mark Davis asked. "We suspected him, but we never had concrete evidence. With Isabella's testimony and the evidence Deacon Jeff Miller brought, we can finally act." The federal agent turned to Isabella, who was again on her mother's lap. "Isabella, can you help me find other lost children?" "I can," she replied without hesitation, "but I have one condition." "What condition?" the agent asked, surprised by the maturity of the answer. "When you find the children, will you let them choose if they want to go back to their real family or stay with the family that took care of them?" The question revealed a deep wisdom about the complexity of the situation. Some of the sold children might have adapted to their new families, especially the younger ones. "That's a very wise decision," the federal agent said. "Each case will be evaluated individually, always considering the best interests of the child." "Then I'll help," Isabella said, "but only if my mommy stays with me always." "Of course I will," Michelle said, kissing her daughter's head. During the following hours, Isabella worked with federal investigators, providing details about each child she had known at the shelter. Her extraordinary memory allowed her to draw rudimentary maps of the places where some children had been taken based on the conversations she had heard. "The couple who took Maria Clara live in a big house with a pool," she said, drawing with colored pencils. "Uncle Marcus said it was near a famous shopping mall." "Beverly Center?" one of the investigators asked. "Could be. They talked a lot about shopping." As the day progressed, it became clear that the case was becoming much larger than anyone had imagined. The FBI decided to establish a protection scheme for Isabella and her family, as well as for the Carters. "You need to understand," the federal agent explained, "that Maxwell Thorne is not just a corrupt man. He's part of an organization that moves millions of dollars. People like that don't hesitate to use violence to protect their business." "What does that mean for us?" Vicky asked, worried. "It means you need constant police protection until we arrest everyone involved in the network." That afternoon, disturbing news came through Mark Davis. Father Michael O'Connell had disappeared from the city overnight, leaving only a note at the rectory saying he needed to resolve personal matters in another state. "He ran away," Beggar said. "He must have been afraid Maxwell would tell about the blackmail." "Or someone threatened him," Ben added grimly. It was then that the news everyone feared arrived. Maxwell's lawyer had secured a writ of habeas corpus, and he would be released that very night, only prohibited from approaching Isabella and leaving the city. "How did he manage that?" Michelle asked, desperate. "Money and influence," the federal agent replied bitterly. "But don't worry. We have 24-hour surveillance on him. If he tries anything, we'll know immediately." That night, The Carter home became a fortress. Discreet federal agents watched from cars parked on the street, while a plainclothes agent remained inside the house. Isabella, sensing the adults' tension, tried to reassure them with her characteristic innocence. "Don't be afraid of Uncle Maxwell," she said during dinner. "Bad men like him always end up punished. That's what happens in the stories my mum tells." "I hope you're right, dear," Vicky said, admiring the girl's strength. "I am. And you know why?" Isabella said, smiling. "Because now I have a big family to protect me. I have my mom, you all, and even the nice police officers. Uncle Maxwell doesn't have anyone real on his side." Later, when everyone was trying to relax watching a movie in the living room, the phone rang. It was a call that would change everything once again. "Hello?" Ben answered. "Mr. Carter," a nervous male voice said, "my name is Robert Anderson. I live in Los Angeles, and I think I have one of the children you're looking for." Robert Anderson's call put the whole house on high alert. Ben put the phone on speaker so everyone could hear, including the federal agent on duty. "Mr. Anderson," Ben said carefully, "how did you hear about our situation?" "I saw the report on national television tonight," Robert replied, his voice filled with emotion. "My wife and we adopted a girl named Clara 8 months ago through the St. Francis Children's Home." Isabella immediately approached the phone. "Is that Maria Clara?" she asked anxiously. "Who's asking?" Robert questioned. "I'm Isabella. Maria Clara is my friend from the shelter. Is she okay?" On the other end of the line, they could hear Robert beginning to cry. She's physically fine, but she never stopped asking about a friend named Isabella and about her older sister." "Her sister?" the federal agent asked, approaching the phone. "Mr. Anderson, this is FBI agent Marco Antonio Turner. Did Maria Clara mention having a sister?" "Constantly. She cries asking for her sister Letty almost every night. We told her she had no known family, but she insists she had a 7-year-old sister." Isabella covered her mouth with her hands. "I forgot about Letty. She was at the shelter when I ran away." "What happened to Letty?" Michelle asked, sitting next to her daughter. "Uncle Maxwell said she was too old to be easily sold," Isabella said, her voice growing small. He sent her to a place he called the warehouse." "What warehouse?" the federal agent asked urgently. "A place where the children no one wanted to buy were kept. Older children, sick children, children who were too much trouble." The silence that followed was terrifying. Everyone understood the sinister implications of what Isabella had revealed. "Mr. Anderson," the federal agent said, "can you come to Harmony Creek tomorrow with Maria Clara? We need to talk in person." "Of course, but what will happen to her? My wife and I love her as our daughter. We don't want to give her back as if she were an object." "No one will treat any child as an object," the agent assured. "But we need to find out the truth about her biological family." "Mr. Robert," Isabella said softly, "are you and Ms. Patricia kind to Maria Clara?" "We are. She's our little princess." "Then maybe she can have 2 families, like I have now," Isabella said, looking at Michelle and then at the Carters. After hanging up, the tension in the room was palpable. The revelation about the warehouse had opened a new and terrible dimension to the investigation. "We need to find that place immediately," the federal agent said, picking up his phone to call for backup. "Isabella," he said gently, "do you remember anything about that warehouse? Where is it? What's it like?" The girl closed her eyes, concentrating on her memories. "Uncle Marcus used to take the children in a white van. They would go to a place far from the city on a road with many tall trees." "Anything else?" "There was a blue sign at the entrance, but I can't read yet, and it had a bad smell, like old food." Mark Davis leaned forward. "Isabella, do you remember how many children were there?" "Many, more than in the regular shelter, and they seemed very sad." That night, no one could sleep properly. The FBI had launched search operations in 3 suspicious locations around Harmony Creek, based on Isabella's description. Meanwhile, the family remained at home under police protection, awaiting news. The next morning, Robert and Patricia Anderson arrived in Harmony Creek, accompanied by Maria Clara. The reunion between the 2 girls was emotional and revealing. "Isabella!" Maria Clara shouted, running to hug her friend. "You didn't leave." "No, I didn't, and you? Are you happy with Papa Robert and Mama Patricia?" "I am, but I missed you so much, and Letty." "Letty will come back too," Isabella promised. "The nice police officers will find her." Robert and Patricia Anderson were an upper-middle-class couple, he an engineer and she a university professor. It was clear they genuinely loved Maria Clara, but they were also devastated to discover that the adoption had been illegal. "We tried to adopt through legal channels for 5 years, Patricia explained, tears in her eyes. "When Maxwell offered us Clara, he said she was an orphan and that the adoption would be faster through his shelter." "Did you pay anything?" the federal agent asked. $60,000, Robert admitted. He said it was for administrative costs and the child's medical care. "And you never suspected something was wrong?" "We suspected when Clara kept talking about her sister and her previous life," Patricia said. "But Maxwell said those were common fantasies in traumatized children." Just then, the federal agent's phone rang. He answered quickly and his expression grew gradually more somber. "We found the warehouse," he announced when he hung up. "It's an abandoned farm 40 miles from here. There were 17 children there, including Letty." "How are they?" Michelle asked, holding Isabella protectively. "Malnourished, scared, but alive. All have been taken to hospitals for medical evaluation." "Can I see Letty?" Maria Clara asked. "Soon, dear. She needs medical care first." During the day, more news came. Other families who had adopted children through Maxwell began to contact authorities after seeing the reports on television. Each call revealed more details about the extent of the criminal operation. A Japanese couple from Washington, D.C. called to say that they had adopted John Peter, but were willing to cooperate with the investigation. A family from Denver confirmed having received Anna Sophia. Each family expressed the same dilemma. They genuinely loved the children they had adopted, but wanted to do the right thing. "This is one of the most complex cases I've ever dealt with," the federal agent admitted to Mark Davis. "There are no clear villains beyond Maxwell and his accomplices. These adoptive families are victims too." In the afternoon, news arrived that changed everything again. Maxwell Thorne had violated his parole and disappeared overnight, cutting his electronic ankle monitor. "He ran away," the agent announced, clearly frustrated. "All city exits are blocked, but he might have escaped before we found out." "Does that mean we're in danger?" Vicky asked. "It means we need to double security. A man like Maxwell, cornered, can be unpredictable." Just then, Isabella approached the federal agent with a determined expression that surprised all the adults. "Agent," she said, "I know where Uncle Maxwell might be hiding." "Where?" "He has a secret house where he kept important things. I heard him talking with Uncle Marcus about it." "Where is this house?" "Near a lake, on a road with lots of rocks. He used to say that if there was ever any trouble, he would hide there until he could leave the country." The federal agent knelt in front of Isabella. "Dear, this is very important. Can you remember anything else about that house?" "It has an iron gate with flower designs and a big dog that barks a lot. Uncle Maxwell called it the Lake House." Immediately, the agent picked up his phone and began coordinating a search operation. In less than an hour, FBI teams were heading to all properties near lakes in the region. Meanwhile, at the Carter home, Maria Clara's 2 families, biological and adoptive, began to talk about the girl's future. "We don't want to separate her from her sister," Patricia said to Michelle. If Letty recovers well, we would like to adopt them together, if possible. And if their biological family shows up, Robert asked. Then we'll do what's best for them, Patricia said firmly, even if it means letting go of our adopted daughter. Isabella and Maria Clara, sitting on the floor, playing with dolls Beggar had lent them, seemed oblivious to the complexity of the adult situation. For them, the important thing was that they were together again. Isabella, Maria Clara said, when Letty gets better, can we be real sisters? We're already sisters in our hearts, Isabella replied, and sisters in our hearts never separate, even when they live in different houses. At the end of the day, as the sun began to set over Harmony Creek, the federal agent's phone rang again. This time the news was good. "We found Maxwell," he announced with satisfaction. He was exactly where Isabella said he'd be. He was arrested trying to flee to Mexico with a suitcase full of money and fake documents. The relief in the house was palpable. Finally, the nightmare was truly over. But as Isabella would learn in the coming days, real happy endings are more complex than fairy tales, and sometimes true healing comes not from a perfect ending, but from the courage to rebuild life with the people you choose to love. A week after Maxwell Thorne's arrest, life began to find a new rhythm for all the families involved. The Carter home had become an informal gathering place for the families dealing with the consequences of the criminal scheme. Michelle had found a job at the University Medical Center and rented a small house just 3 blocks from the Carters. Isabella attended a private school where her exceptional memory helped her studies, but also made her different from other children her age. "Teacher Anna," Isabella said during a lesson, "you said 2 plus 2 is 4. But yesterday in art class you said that when we mix 2 primary colors with 2 other colors, we get 6 new colors, not 4. Teacher Anna Smith was flustered. She wasn't used to 4-year-olds paying so much attention to numerical details and remembering exactly everything said in previous classes. "Isabella, you're very smart," the teacher said. "But sometimes you don't need to remember everything with such precision." "But my head remembers by itself," Isabella replied, confused. "I can't make it stop." This episode led to a difficult conversation at home that night. Michelle was concerned that Isabella's extraordinary memory might become another source of isolation for her. Mark suggested we find a specialist in gifted children, Michelle said to Vicky during dinner at the Carters, a tradition that had been established 3 times a week. "Do you think that's necessary?" Vicky asked. "I don't know. Isabella sometimes seems to carry the burden of remembering too much, and the other children at school have started to find her strange." Isabella, who was playing on the living room floor with her colored pencils, looked up. "Mommy, I overheard. I'm not strange. I'm different." Becca explained that different can be good. "And I'm right," Becca said, defending her little protégé. "Isabella, your memory helps save many children. That's a gift." "But sometimes it hurts," Isabella admitted. "I remember bad things I wish I could forget." "Like what?" Michelle asked softly. "I remember Uncle Maxwell's voice when he got angry. I remember the bad smell of the warehouse. I remember the other boys crying at night." The silence that followed was heavy. Everyone realized that Isabella's extraordinary memory was both a blessing and a curse. "Honey," Ben said, sitting on the floor beside her, "would you like to talk to a special doctor who helps children deal with difficult memories?" "Will she make me forget the bad things?" "No, but she can teach you how to make the bad memories hurt less." "What about the good memories? Will I still remember my mother singing, Miss Victoria giving me a bath on the first day, Mr. Carter protecting me?" "Those you'll remember forever," Ben promised. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, Sarah Miller was facing her own challenges. The transition to life in Harmony Creek wasn't as smooth as expected. Letty still had constant nightmares and refused to sleep alone, while Maria Clara was visibly confused about the new family dynamic. "Mommy Sarah," Maria Clara said one night, "can I call Mommy Patricia to say goodnight too?" The innocent question broke Sarah's heart. She had spent months dreaming of reuniting with her daughters, but she hadn't considered what it would be like to share their love with another family. "Of course, my dear," Sarah said, swallowing her wounded pride. "Mommy Patricia can always come say goodnight to you." When Patricia arrived, she and Robert had rented a house 2 blocks from Sarah's to facilitate visits. She immediately sensed the tension. "Sarah, is everything okay?" she asked when the girls were asleep. "No," Sarah admitted. "I feel like I'm dividing my daughters, and I don't know how to handle it." "I understand," Patricia said softly. "Sometimes I feel lost too. I loved Maria Clara like a daughter for 8 months, but I know you're her real mother." "Maybe," Sarah said slowly, "we're both real mothers, just in different ways." It was then that they had a conversation that would change the family dynamic forever. They decided to create an official time-sharing schedule, but more importantly, they decided to make decisions about the girls always together. "What if we became co-mothers?" Patricia suggested hesitantly. "Officially? How so?" "Robert and I would like to adopt Letty and maintain our shared custody of Maria Clara. Would you agree?" Sarah was silent for a long moment. It was a radical proposal, but looking at the genuine happiness of her daughters when they were with both families, she realized it could be the ideal solution. "Under one condition," Sarah said finally. "Which one?" "That we make all important decisions together. School, doctor, discipline, everything." "Agreed. And that the girls always know they have 2 families who love them, but that I am their biological mother." "Of course." 3 weeks later, in a simple ceremony at the Harmony Creek City Clerk's office, Robert and Patricia formalized Letty's adoption while establishing legal, shared custody of Maria Clara with Sarah. It was an unusual situation, but the judge, knowing the girl's story, approved the arrangements. "Now we're officially a strange family," Robert joked after the ceremony. "The best strange family in the world," Letty finished, speaking more than she had in weeks. Meanwhile, other revelations continued to emerge about Maxwell's scheme. Mark Davis had published a series of investigative reports that resulted in the discovery of similar operations in 3 other states. His work had become a national reference in the fight against child trafficking. "Isabella," he said during one of his visits, "your courage saved many more children than you imagine." "How so?" "Because of your story, other children in similar situations were found. 19 children so far." "And did they all go back to their families?" "Most did. Some, like you and Maria Clara, gained new families who joined their old ones. And Uncle Maxwell, he was sentenced to 20 years in prison. He won't hurt any more children." Isabella was quiet for a moment. "Mark, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "When you write about all this, can you say that children who went through bad things can be happy again, for other children to read and have hope?" "I'll write exactly that." At the end of that month, something unexpected happened. Father Michael, who had disappeared during the investigation, returned to Harmony Creek. He had spent the last few months on a spiritual retreat, reflecting on his actions. "I've come to ask for forgiveness," he said to the Carters and to Deacon Jeff and Karen Miller, who were present at the meeting. "Especially to you, Isabella," he said, kneeling in front of the girl. "I should have protected you, but I let fear and shame control me." "Father Michael," Isabella said with her peculiar wisdom, "you did wrong things, but in the end, you helped stop Uncle Maxwell. That counts too. Do you forgive me?" I do, but promise not to lie anymore. I promise. Deacon Jeff and Karen had also gone through their own journey of healing. After months of couples therapy, they had learned to communicate their frustrations and fears without violence or betrayal. Our marriage almost ended, Karen admitted, but we discovered that when we stop keeping secrets from each other, we become stronger. And we learned, Deacon Jeff added, that every child deserves protection, no matter what. If we had acted sooner to protect Isabella, perhaps many other children wouldn't have suffered. By the end of the year, the informal community created around the rescued children had become a model studied by social workers across the country. Biological and adoptive families coexisting, children maintaining multiple but healthy bonds, adults taking collective responsibility for the protection of all children in the group. "Do you know what I've learned in these months?" Vicky said during one of the weekly meetings of all the families. "What?" asked several at the same time. "That family isn't about blood or papers. It's about choosing every day to protect, love, and care for each other. And about never giving up," Isabella added, "even when things get very difficult." At that moment, looking around the room filled with adults and children who had chosen each other as family, everyone realized they had found something rare and precious. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, built on solid foundations of love, mutual protection, and the shared determination that no child should ever go through what these had. True healing had begun not with a perfect ending, but with the daily courage to rebuild life with the people they chose to love. And for Isabella, a girl who remembered everything, these were the most precious memories of all, the memories of belonging, safety, and unconditional love she was creating every day. 6 months had passed since the community settled in Harmony Creek, and life was finding a more stable rhythm, though not without its unique challenges. Isabella, now 5 years old, was in preschool, and her extraordinary intellectual capacity continued to attract attention, though not always positively. "Teacher Anna," Isabella said during a numbers lesson, "you said 2 plus 2 is 4, but yesterday, in art class, you said that when we mix 2 primary colors with 2 other colors, we get 6 new colors, not 4. Teacher Anna Smith sighed. Dealing with Isabella required a creativity she hadn't learned in her pedagogy studies. "Isabella, these are different situations," the teacher tried to explain. "But you used the word result in both cases," Isabella insisted. "Why is math different from art if both have results?" The other children looked at Isabella with a mix of admiration and strangeness. She was clearly different, and at 5 years old, different wasn't always well accepted. "Isabella is annoying," a girl named Olivia whispered to her friend. "She always knows everything. And she talks about scary things," another boy added. "Yesterday she said she remembered bad men taking children away." Isabella heard the whispers and felt a familiar pang in her chest. At recess, instead of playing with the other children, she sat alone under a tree, drawing in a notebook she always carried. "What are you drawing?" a soft voice asked. Isabella looked up and saw an older girl, perhaps 7, with curly hair and a gentle smile. "Birds," Isabella replied. "I draw birds when I'm sad." "Why are you sad?" "Because the other children think I'm strange." The older girl sat beside Isabella. "I'm Lily, and you're not strange, you're special. My mom says special people always seem different at first." "How do you know I'm special?" "Because my teacher told yours that you helped the police find lost children. That's a superhero thing to do." For the first time that day, Isabella smiled. "I'm not a superhero. I just remember everything I hear." "That's a superpower," Lily declared. "Do you want to play with me?" The friendship with Lily marked the beginning of a change. For Isabella, Lily was the daughter of one of the school teachers and had grown up hearing about children with special needs. She didn't see Isabella's memory as strange, but as fascinating. "Can you remember the first time you ate ice cream?" Lily asked as they played during recess. "I can. I was 3, it was strawberry ice cream, I was in a park with my mom, and a man was playing guitar near the fountain." "Wow. And the first time you saw rain?" "I was 2.5. I was with my mom at the window of our house, and she sang a song about raindrops falling from the sky." Lily was delighted with the detailed stories Isabella could tell, and gradually other children began to take an interest too. Instead of finding Isabella strange, they started asking her to tell stories from her memories. "Tell the one about when you saw the rainbow," a girl asked during snack time, "or the one about when you learned to tie your shoe," another suggested. Slowly, Isabella began to realize that her memory could be a way to connect with other children, not to separate from them. At home, other important changes were happening. Michelle had begun a relationship with Dr. Philip Anderson, a pediatrician at the hospital where she worked. He was a kind 40-year-old man, divorced and a father to an 8-year-old boy named Ethan. "Isabella," Michelle said nervously one night, "how would you feel if Dr. Philip came to dinner here tomorrow, with Ethan?" Isabella stopped drawing and looked at her mother. "Do you like him?" "Yes, I do." "Is he kind to you?" "Very kind." "And with children? Is he good with children?" "He's a pediatrician, honey. He dedicates his life to caring for children." Isabella considered this information. "Then I want to meet him, but can I ask questions?" "What kind of questions?" "Questions to know if he's a truly good person." The next day, when Dr. Philip arrived for dinner bringing Ethan, Isabella received him with a solemnity that amused the adults but revealed her deep concerns. "Dr. Philip," she said, "can I ask you some important questions?" "Of course, Isabella." "If a child is scared, do you yell at them?" "Never. If a child is scared, my job is to help them feel safe." "And if she cries a lot?" "Crying is normal. When we're scared or sad, I always let children cry as much as they need to." "And if she wets the bed?" "That happens to many children. It's no reason to be angry, it's a reason to change the sheets and give a hug." Ethan, who was listening to Isabella's questions, approached. "Isabella, my dad is the coolest doctor in the world. He never yelled at me once." "Not even when you break something?" "Not even when I broke Grandma's favorite vase," Ethan confirmed, smiling. During dinner, Isabella carefully observed how Dr. Philip treated everyone at the table. He listened. When the children spoke, asked interested questions about their drawings, and most importantly, treated Michelle with a respectful affection that Isabella had learned to recognize as a sign of a good person. "Mommy," Isabella whispered when Dr. Philip was helping with the dishes. "He can be our special friend." "Are you sure?" "Yes. He makes you smile the way you used to smile before the bad things happened." Meanwhile, at the Miller-Anderson family's home, other developments were taking place. Letty had begun to speak openly about her traumas for the first time, working with a child psychologist specializing in abuse cases. "Dr. Sarah," Letty said during a session, "why do some people hurt children?" "That's a very difficult question, Letty. Sometimes adult people have very big problems in their minds, and that makes them do wrong things. But why don't they seek help instead of hurting us?" "Some seek help, like you are doing now. Others are too afraid or ashamed to ask for help." "Was Uncle Maxwell afraid?" "I don't know, dear. But I know that what he did was wrong, regardless of why." "And now he can't hurt any more children?" "That's right. He's in prison, where he can't hurt anyone." These conversations, though difficult, were helping Letty process her traumas in a healthy way. She was gradually regaining her confidence and natural joy. Maria Clara, for her part, was thriving in the dual family arrangement. She had developed a routine where she spent 3 days a week with Sarah and 4 with Robert and Patricia, but the two families often met for joint activities. "Mommy Sarah," Maria Clara said one afternoon, "can I tell you a secret?" "Of course, my dear." "Sometimes I have nightmares about the shelter, but when I wake up I remember that I have 2 families protecting me, and the fear goes away." "And what do you dream about in those nightmares?" "That someone comes to take me away again. But then I wake up and I know that will never happen because I have many papas and mamas taking care of me." The emotional security Maria Clara had developed was a testament to the success of the unconventional family arrangement. At the end of the year, Mark Davis published a book about the investigation he had done, titled Memories of Hope: How a 4-year-old Girl Saved Dozens of Children. All proceeds from the book were donated to organizations that fought child trafficking. "Isabella," he said during the book launch, "do you want to say something to the people who will read about our story?" Isabella thought carefully before answering. "I want to say that sometimes very bad things happen to children, but there are always good people willing to help, and that children who have been through bad things can be happy again if they have patience and people who love them." "And what would you say to other children who might be going through difficult situations?" "That they should tell someone they trust, and that they shouldn't be afraid to ask for help, and that they should remember that they are not to blame for the bad things that happen to them." That night, during the book launch party, all the families in the community were gathered. Isabella looked around and saw her mother talking animatedly to Dr. Philip, Letty laughing with Robert and Patricia, Maria Clara running between all her parental figures, the Carters organizing the party with their usual affection. "Beggar," Isabella said, approaching the teenager who had become her unofficial older sister, "do you remember when all this started? When I was in the square, scared?" "I remember perfectly," Beggar replied. "You were a small, frightened girl." "And now?" Beggar looked at Isabella, taller, more confident, surrounded by people who loved her unconditionally. "Now you're a small, brave girl who has a huge family and who helped change the world for the better." "Thank you," Isabella said, hugging Beggar. "For what?" "For defending me when I couldn't defend myself." At that moment, observing her extended family gathered in celebration, Isabella understood something fundamental about healing and overcoming. It wasn't about forgetting the past or pretending that bad things had never happened. It was about building a present so full of love and security that the future became a promise of infinite possibilities. And for the first time since she could remember, when Isabella thought about the future, she didn't feel fear. She felt hope. Chapter 14. A full year had passed since Isabella was found in St. Sebastian's Church Square, and the date approached with a mixture of reflection and celebration that no one had anticipated. The girl, now 5.5, had suggested something that surprised all the adults. She wanted to have a family anniversary party on the exact day she met the Carters. "Why, dear?" Michelle asked, intrigued by her daughter's idea. "Because it was the day my life split into a before and an after," Isabella explained with her peculiar wisdom. "Before, it was just sadness and fear. After, it turned into love and family." Vicky, who was present during the conversation, felt her eyes well up with tears. "Isabella, are you sure you want to remember that day? It wasn't exactly happy at first." "It was the most important day of my life," Isabella replied with conviction, "and I want to celebrate because all the good things that happened afterward started that day." The party was planned to take place in the Carters' backyard, which had become the natural gathering place for the entire extended community. During the week leading up to the celebration, each family contributed with special preparations: Dr. Philip, who was now officially Michelle's boyfriend, brought Ethan to help decorate the yard. The two boys, Ethan and a cousin of Becca's who had joined the festivities, worked together with the girls to create a decoration that symbolized new beginnings. "What color represents hope?" Ethan asked Isabella as they chose colorful ribbons. "Yellow," she replied without hesitation, "because it's the color of the sun that rises every day, giving a new chance for things to be good." Letty and Maria Clara, who had become the best friends possible despite the age difference, created a memory book where each person in the community wrote or drew something about how their lives had changed in the past year. "Isabella," Letty said, showing her page in the book, "I wrote that I learned that families can be different sizes and shapes, but love is always the same. And I drew all of us together as a big tree," Maria Clara added, "where each person is a branch, but everyone is connected at the root." Robert and Patricia, along with Sarah, prepared a photographic presentation showing the children's evolution over the year. The first photos showed scared and withdrawn girls. The last ones revealed confident, smiling children surrounded by love. "It's amazing how much they've changed," Patricia commented as she organized the images. "Especially Isabella. Look at this photo from the first day, how she hid behind Vicky, and now..." The most recent photo showed Isabella in the center of a group of children at school, telling a story with animated gestures, clearly in the role of a natural leader. Mark Davis was working on a special surprise. He had managed to contact some of the other families whose children had been rescued thanks to Isabella's testimony. 3 families from other states would come to Harmony Creek specifically to thank her in person. "They don't know they're coming," he explained to Ben. "It'll be a surprise." "Do you think Isabella will like it?" "I'm sure. She always asks about the other children." On the morning of the party, Isabella woke up earlier than usual and ran to the window to check the weather. The day was sunny, with a few white clouds that seemed to have been painted in the sky, especially for the occasion. "Mommy," she said, jumping on the bed where Michelle was still sleeping, "it's the day." "The most important day of our lives," Michelle agreed, hugging her daughter. "How do you feel?" "Happy, but also a little scared." "Scared why?" "Because sometimes I still can't believe all this happiness is real. I'm afraid to wake up and find out it was just a dream." Michelle held her daughter's face in her hands. "My dear, this is very real. And do you know how I know?" "How?" "Because dreams don't hurt when we stub our toe, they don't smell of coffee in the morning, and they don't tickle." Michelle began to tickle Isabella, who laughed until she was breathless. "Mom, stop. I believe it's real." During the afternoon, when guests began to arrive, it became evident that the party had become something much bigger than anyone had imagined. In addition to the community families, neighbors, co-workers, school teachers, and even some people who had simply been inspired by Isabella's story through Mark Davis's, reports appeared. "We didn't expect so many people," Vicky said to Ben, watching the backyard fill up. "I think we underestimated the impact our little princess had on many people's lives," he replied, seeing Isabella circulating among the guests with the confidence of a true hostess. The most emotional moment of the party came when Mark Davis announced the special surprise. A van pulled up in front of the house, and 3 families emerged from it, each bringing a child who had been rescued thanks to Isabella's testimony. "John Peter!" Isabella shouted, immediately recognizing a 6-year-old blonde boy who ran to hug her. "Isabella, you saved my life," John Peter said, clinging to his friend. "How so?" "My new parents told me it was you who told the police where I was. If it weren't for you, I would never have found my real family." One by one, the other children introduced themselves. Anna Sophia, now 7 and clearly happy with her reunited family. Charlie Davis, the boy with Down syndrome who had found a family who loved him exactly as he was. "You know," Anna Sophia said to the group of children, that Isabella is a real hero. I'm not a hero, Isabella protested, embarrassed by the attention. You are, Charles Charlie insisted with his characteristic sincerity. You saved us. That's a hero's job. Heroes, Lily said. The school friend who had become Isabella's best friend are normal people who do extraordinary things to help others. That's exactly what you did. As the afternoon progressed, small, magical moments happened that no one had planned. Deacon Jeff Miller, who had become a completely different person after therapy, played the guitar while Karen sang children's songs for the kids. Father Michael, who had returned to a rural parish where he was rebuilding his spiritual life, showed up by surprise to bless the gathering. Isabella, he said, kneeling in front of the girl, thank you for giving me a second chance to be a better person. Father Michael, everyone deserves second chances when they promise to do better, Isabella replied. Dr. Philip, watching Isabella interact with everyone present, approached Michelle. She's extraordinary, he commented. How can such a small child have so much emotional wisdom? I think those who go through great difficulties learn to value small, good things, Michelle replied. Isabella knows what suffering is, so she recognizes true happiness when she finds it. The culmination of the party came when Beggar, now 17 and about to start law school to specialize in child rights, asked to give a speech. A year ago, she began, her voice firm but emotional, our family changed forever when my father made the decision to protect an unknown child. We didn't know that decision would save not only Isabella, but dozens of other children. And we didn't know that this little child would teach us so much about courage, forgiveness, and love. She paused, looking at Isabella, who was sitting on Vicky's lap. Isabella, you taught us that family isn't about blood or legal documents. It's about choosing to take care of each other every day. Thank you for choosing us as your family. And thank you for choosing me first, Isabella replied, running to hug Beggar. When the sun began to set, Isabella asked to give one last thank you. She positioned herself in the center of the backyard, surrounded by all the people who had become her extended family. A year ago, she said in her clear voice, I was very scared and thought I would never be happy again. Today I'm here surrounded by people I love and who love me too. I learned that bad things can happen, but good things can happen afterward too. She looked at each face around her. I learned that when good adults protect children, everyone becomes stronger. I learned that forgiving doesn't mean forgetting, but it means not letting anger hurt our hearts. And I learned that families can grow when we open our hearts. The silence that followed was filled with emotion. There wasn't a dry eye in the yard. And now, Isabella said, smiling, I want everyone to know that today isn't just my family anniversary. It's everyone's family anniversary. Because you are all my family, and I am your family too. At that moment, as the golden sun of Harmony Creek set on the horizon, a girl who had begun her journey as a victim stood as a symbol of hope. Isabella had discovered that her extraordinary memory, which sometimes seemed like a curse, was actually a gift that allowed her to forever keep not only the pains of the past, but the joys of the present. And while all those people who had chosen each other as family embraced in the backyard decorated with yellow ribbons, one thing became clear. True love doesn't erase scars, but transforms them into symbols of strength. And sometimes the most beautiful stories begin in the darkest moments, when someone decides that it's worth fighting for the light. The party ended that night, but the family that had been born from that tragedy, transformed into triumph, would continue to grow, protecting and loving for many years. And Isabella, with her memory that guarded everything, would make sure that no precious moment was ever forgotten. If you like this video, please subscribe to my channel. I promise to bring you videos every day that will make your life happier, Comment what you thought of my story, giving it a score from 0 to 10, and thank you very much.